That night, Officer Nathaniel was on his usual patrol route in a quiet suburb. It had been a long day filled with mundane traffic stops and barking dog complaints. The last thing he expected was to stumble upon a scene that would haunt him forever. As he passed the playground, something made him stop. Nathaniel wasn't one to ignore his instincts. Stepping out of his cruiser, flashlight in hand, he walked toward the swings. His beam of light landed on a little girl, her arms hugging her knees, her face buried to block out the chill of the night. Who was she? Why was she here? "Hey, sweetheart," Nathaniel said softly, crouching down to her level. The girl flinched but didn't move away. Her tiny frame looked even smaller under his flashlight. She was wearing a thin hoodie, hardly enough to keep warm, and her sneakers were so worn out they looked like they'd fall apart any second. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but urgent. The girl finally looked up, her big brown eyes filled with a mix of fear and exhaustion. "I'm fine," she mumbled. But Nathaniel could tell she was far from fine. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears, her lips chapped, and her hands trembling from the cold. What could have driven a child to sleep in a playground? Was she lost? Abandoned? Every possibility ran through his mind, each more heartbreaking than the last. Before further into story, may I kindly ask, where are you watching from? Please share your location in the comments. We truly value hearing from you. And if you haven't already, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe and like this video. Your support means so much to us. Now, let's begin. As Nathaniel tried to gently ask the girl for her name, she grew more guarded. "I'm okay," she repeated, her voice firmer this time, but her shivering gave her away. Nathaniel knew he had to tread carefully. The last thing he wanted was to scare her off. So he changed his approach. "You like swings?" he asked, motioning to the swing set behind her. The girl hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I used to love them as a kid," he said with a warm smile. "Used to see how high I could go, like I was trying to touch the stars." For the first time, a tiny smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "That's better," Nathaniel said, relieved to see her relax, even if just a little. "Now, what do you say we get you somewhere warm? Maybe grab some hot chocolate?" The girl's smile faded, and she shook her head. "I can't," she whispered. "Why not?" Nathaniel asked, his heart breaking a little more with every second. "Because they'll find me." The girl's voice trembled, barely audible over the gentle rustling of the trees. Her words hung in the air, heavy and cryptic, piercing through Officer Nathaniel, composure like a dagger. He froze, his mind racing. Who were they? What could terrify this child so deeply that she'd rather sleep in the cold than seek help? Nathaniel took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. He had handled tense situations before, but this was different. This wasn't a hardened criminal or a chaotic traffic accident. This was a little girl, scared, vulnerable, and alone. He crouched lower, his voice softer now, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile moment. "No one's going to hurt you while I'm here. I promise," he said. She looked up at him, her big brown eyes brimming with tears that refused to fall. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Then help me understand," Nathaniel replied, his tone steady but filled with urgency. "I can't help you unless you tell me what's going on. Who are you afraid of?" For a moment, the girl seemed to wrestle with herself. Her tiny hands gripped the hem of her hoodie, twisting the fabric as if it would anchor her in some way. Finally, she muttered, "The people who took my mom." Nathaniel felt his heart stop. Before we explore further, what would you do in this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and give the video a thumbs up. Nathaniel knew he was stepping into something far bigger than he had anticipated. The situation had shifted from tragic to dangerous, and time was of the essence. "Took your mom," he repeated carefully, trying to keep his voice from betraying the shock he felt. The girl nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "They came to our house. There were so many of them. Mom told me to hide, so I did. But they found her. They took her away and I ran." Nathaniel, stomach churned. This wasn't just a case of neglect or abandonment. This was something far darker. "How long ago was this?" he asked. 3 days, she said quietly. 3 days. 3 days of wandering the streets, hungry, cold, and scared out of her mind. Nathaniel couldn't even fathom the strength it had taken for her to survive this long. And just when you think the story couldn't get more intense, it does. What Officer Nathaniel does next is nothing short of extraordinary. Keep watching, because the next part will leave you on the edge of your seat. Nathaniel pulled out his radio, hesitating for a split second. He knew calling this in would bring a flood of officers, reporters, and chaos. Would that help or hurt this terrified child? He decided to take a different route, at least for now. Listen, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm going to take you somewhere safe. We'll figure this out together, okay? The girl looked at him, her expression a mixture of doubt and hope. You promise they won't find me? I promise, Nathaniel said without hesitation. But you have to trust me. She hesitated for what felt like an eternity before finally nodding. Nathaniel reached into his pocket and handed her a small packet of crackers he had grabbed earlier for a snack. Here, he said. It's not much, but it'll help until we can get you something better. She took the crackers with trembling hands, whispering a quiet thank you. As they walked back to his patrol car, Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced around the park, his trained eyes scanning the shadows for any signs of movement. But the park was still. Too still. Do you think they're following you? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual so he wouldn't alarm her. The girl nodded, clutching her small backpack tightly to her chest. They always find people, she said, her voice trembling. Nathaniel didn't reply, but his mind was racing. Who were these people? And how far would they go to cover their tracks? As they reached the car, he opened the door for her and helped her into the passenger seat. Buckle up, he said with a reassuring smile, trying to mask the growing sense of unease in his chest. He started the engine and pulled out of the park, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The streets were quiet, but Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. What happens next will change everything. As the patrol car rolled through the silent streets, Officer Nathaniel couldn't ignore the gnawing sensation in his gut. Every flicker of light, every passing car, every shadow lurking in the corners seemed like a potential threat. He wasn't sure if it was his heightened instincts or if someone really was following them. The girl sat silently beside him, her hands clutching the tattered straps of her backpack. Her eyes darted nervously between the side mirror and the street ahead. Nathaniel wanted to reassure her, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep. So, he started cautiously, breaking the silence. What's in the bag? The girl stiffened, pulling the backpack closer to her chest. Just stuff, she muttered. Nathaniel glanced at her. I'm not going to take it from you, he said gently. But if there's anything in there that might help us figure out who these people are, it could make a big difference. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, as if deciding she could trust him, she unzipped the bag and pulled out a crumpled photograph. She handed it to him without a word. Nathaniel took the photograph, careful not to smudge its worn edges. It was a family portrait, a woman in her early 30s, a man standing proudly beside her, and the girl, much younger, grinning widely between them. That's my mom, she said, pointing to the woman. And my dad. Nathaniel frowned. Where's your dad now? Her grip tightened on the bag. He's gone. They got him first. Who's they? Nathaniel pressed gently. The girl shook her head, her lips trembling. I don't know. Mom just called them bad people. She said they wanted to hurt us because of something Dad did. But she wouldn't tell me what. Nathaniel's grip on the steering wheel tightened. This wasn't just a random tragedy. It was deliberate, targeted, and methodical. But then something happened that neither of them expected. The faint hum of an engine drifted into Nathaniel's ears. It was subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but it grew louder with every passing second. He glanced into the rearview mirror and saw the unmistakable glow of headlights trailing behind them. We've got company, he muttered under his breath. The girl's eyes widened. It's them, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nathaniel's mind went into overdrive. He couldn't lead them to the station. That would put everyone else at risk, but he couldn't keep driving aimlessly either. He needed a plan, and fast. Hold on, he said. his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. He made a sharp turn onto a side street, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The headlights behind them followed suit, growing closer with every second. And just when you think it couldn't get worse, it does. What Nathaniel is about to uncover will blow your mind. "Keep your head down," Nathaniel instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. The girl obeyed, crouching low in her seat as Nathaniel weaved through the labyrinth of streets. He wasn't just trying to lose the tail. He was trying to figure out who they were and what they wanted. Finally, he spotted a narrow alleyway and swerved into it, killing the headlights and engine. The patrol car came to a silent stop, cloaked in the shadows of the towering buildings on either side. "Stay here," Nathaniel said, reaching for his flashlight and stepping out of the car. The air was thick with tension as he crept toward the mouth of the alley, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the faint rumble of the pursuing car as it slowed down, its occupants clearly searching for them. Nathaniel pressed himself against the wall, peeking around the corner just in time to see a black SUV crawling down the street. Its windows were tinted, its license plate obscured. Everything about it screamed danger. The SUV paused for a moment, its engine idling ominously. Nathaniel held his breath, his fingers tightening around the flashlight. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the SUV sped off into the night. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. Nathaniel exhaled deeply, his mind racing. Whoever these people were, they were organized, relentless, and dangerous. He knew he couldn't face them alone. Returning to the car, he found the girl clutching her knees to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. "Are they gone?" she asked. "For now," Nathaniel said, sliding back into the driver's seat. "But we can't stay here. Where are we going?" "To someone who can help," Nathaniel replied, though he wasn't entirely sure who that someone was yet. The city seemed darker than usual, its shadows stretching longer, wrapping around the streets like they held secrets no one dared to uncover. Officer Nathaniel drove with purpose, though uncertainty swirled in his mind. The girl sat quietly beside him, gripping her backpack as though it contained the only thread connecting her to a life that once was. "All right," Nathaniel said, breaking the silence. "If we're going to figure this out, we need answers and fast." The girl didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed out the window, watching the world blur past. But then she spoke, her voice soft yet sharp. "You're going to take me to him, aren't you?" Nathaniel glanced at her, confusion creasing his brow. "To who?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "Mom said if anything happened, I should give this to someone I could trust." Nathaniel took the paper, unfolding it carefully. The message inside was short but chilling. Asterisk, "Get her to the chief. He's the only one who can stop them." Asterisk. Nathaniel's heart sank as he read the note. The chief? Why hadn't her mother come to him directly? Why had she chosen this cryptic, indirect route instead? "This chief," Nathaniel said, his voice steady but probing. "Do you know him?" The girl shook her head. "Mom said he used to know my dad. She said they worked together a long time ago, but she never told me what they did." Nathaniel clenched his jaw. He knew the chief well, or at least he thought he did. If this situation involved him, it wasn't going to be simple. The tension skyrocketed when a deafening bang shattered the quiet night. "Get down," Nathaniel barked, instinctively shielding the girl as the patrol car veered sharply to the side. The sound of gunshots echoed through the air, and before he could react, the rear windshield exploded into a shower of glass. "They found us," the girl whimpered, her voice trembling. Nathaniel hit the gas, the car lurching forward as he navigated the darkened streets at breakneck speed. He needed to lose their pursuers, and fast. And just when you think it can't get any worse, it does. Another shot rang out, this one grazing the side mirror. Nathaniel cursed under his breath. Whoever these people were, they weren't just sending a message. They wanted them gone. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice firm but calm. The girl clung to her seat as Nathaniel swerved into a narrow alley, the patrol car barely squeezing through. The gunfire ceased momentarily, but Nathaniel knew better than to think they were safe. "We can't keep running like this," the girl said, her voice barely audible. "They'll find us no matter where we go." Nathaniel glanced at her, his mind racing. "Then we need to figure out what they want and why they're willing to kill for it." But what he's about to discover will change everything. As they emerged from the alley onto a quieter street, Nathaniel pulled over and killed the engine. He turned to the girl, his eyes searching hers for answers. "Listen," he said, his tone serious. "I need to know everything, right now. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If I'm going to protect you, I need the whole story." The girl hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the straps of her backpack. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "It started a year ago," she said. "My dad, he worked for this company. They said they were building something to make the world safer, but he found out it wasn't true. He found out they were making something dangerous, something that could hurt a lot of people." "What kind of something?" Nathaniel pressed. The girl shook her head. "I don't know. He never told me. But he said if they found out he knew, they'd come after all of us." Nathaniel mind raced. This wasn't just a random case. It was a full-blown conspiracy. The stakes have never been higher. "Are you ready to see how deep this rabbit hole goes?" Before Nathaniel could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. For a moment, he felt a glimmer of hope. Reinforcements, perhaps? But that hope was quickly extinguished when he realized the sirens weren't from his precinct. The girl's eyes widened in fear. "It's them," she whispered. Nathaniel's instincts kicked in. "Stay here," he ordered, stepping out of the car with his hand on his holster. The sirens grew louder, and soon, an unmarked van screeched to a halt a few yards away. Its doors swung open, and several men in tactical gear emerged, their faces obscured by masks. "Officer Nathaniel," one of them called out, his voice cold and authoritative. "Hand over the girl, and we'll pretend this never happened." Nathaniel's hand tightened around his weapon. "Not a chance," he replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The standoff was tense, each second stretching into an eternity. Nathaniel knew he was outnumbered, but he also knew he couldn't give up the girl. And just when you think you've seen it all, the game changes completely. Before the men could make their move, a black SUV came barreling down the street, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a blade. The van's occupants barely had time to react before the SUV skidded to a halt and its doors flew open. Out stepped a man Nathaniel recognized instantly, the chief. "Stand down," the chief barked, his voice commanding and unyielding. The masked men hesitated, clearly caught off guard by his presence. "What the hell is going on here?" Nathaniel demanded, his eyes darting between the chief and the men. The chief ignored him, his focus entirely on the men in front of him. "You've done enough damage," he said. "Leave now, or I'll make sure you regret it." The tension was palpable as the men exchanged glances. Finally, one of them spoke. "This isn't over," he said, his voice dripping with menace. With that, they retreated to their van and sped off into the night. But the questions are far from over. Who are these men? And what does the chief know that he isn't telling? Nathaniel turned to the chief, his expression a mix of relief and suspicion. "What the hell is going on, sir?" The chief sighed heavily. "It's a long story," he said, glancing at the girl. "But first, we need to get her somewhere safe." Nathaniel nodded, though his mind was buzzing with unanswered questions. Whatever this was, it was bigger than anything he'd ever dealt with before. And as the three of them drove off into the night, one thing was clear. The truth was out there, and it was only a matter of time before it came to light. It was a cold Wednesday morning when Nathaniel found himself back at the park where everything had started. The sun had barely risen, and the streets were still quiet. The park was the same. Empty swings swaying in the breeze, the sound of birds chirping quietly in the background. But something was different now. There was a truth in the air, something lingering that Nathaniel couldn't quite put his finger on. He stood at the entrance of the park, his hands stuffed into his coat pockets, the cold air biting his face. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to return to the place where it all began. As Nathaniel walked deeper into the park, he could feel the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. The ground was damp from the previous night's rain, and his boots left prints in the mud as he made his way toward the old wooden bench. It was there, just there, that he had first found Emma, sitting alone, her knees drawn up to her chest, as if trying to shield herself from the world. Now, it wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about finding the answers. Why had Emma's mother been sitting in the park that night? The truth came to him suddenly, as if the world itself had shifted. Nathaniel hadn't expected it to hit him so hard, so quickly. He had assumed that Emma's mother had been a victim of circumstance, a woman trying to protect her daughter from the unknown dangers of the world. But as Nathaniel pieced together the fragments of the past, the story began to make sense. Emma's mother, Alicia, had been involved in something much bigger than a simple case of neglect. Alicia had been working with a group of whistleblowers within the system, people who had discovered the dark secrets lurking beneath the surface of their small town. The secrets no one was supposed to know about, the corruption that had spread through the local police force like a cancer, reaching into every corner of their lives. But it wasn't just corruption they had uncovered. It was something more sinister. Alicia had stumbled upon evidence of illegal activities tied to the local police, involving money laundering, illegal arms deals, and worse, and she had made the mistake of trusting the wrong people with that information. The truth about what Alicia had been hiding, the reason she had been sitting alone in the park that night, was simple. She had been running from the very people who had betrayed her, the very officers who had made her family a target, the ones who had forced her into hiding and, eventually, had taken her life. Nathaniel stood still, the revelation sinking in slowly, like the weight of the world falling onto his shoulders. Alicia hadn't been a woman hiding from her own past. She had been a woman fighting for her daughter's future, for the truth that could change everything. As Nathaniel stood there, piecing the puzzle together, the realization hit him with full force. Emma hadn't been a scared girl simply hiding from danger. She had been a witness. And now, the dangerous game her mother had started was about to come to a head. Nathaniel had thought he was protecting Emma, but the truth was, Emma had been protecting him all along. She had known. She had known that the secrets her mother had uncovered were dangerous, and she had fought with every ounce of her being to keep them from getting lost forever. Back at the precinct, Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling of dread that followed him. He knew what he had to do. The information he had uncovered was damning, and it wasn't just going to disappear. He had already seen the depth of the corruption within the department, but now it was personal. He couldn't sit by while Emma and the entire town paid the price for secrets that ran so deep. As he approached his desk, he opened the file Alicia had left behind, the one Emma had given him. There were names, dates, and most importantly, a connection to the very men who had taken Emma's mother, the very officers who had spent their careers covering up their tracks. Nathaniel made a decision in that moment. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to confront the higher-ups. He had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. With every passing hour, the weight of the truth grew heavier. Nathaniel had a choice to make. He could walk away, pretend it didn't exist, let the corruption spread further, and protect himself from the fallout. Or he could step into the unknown and do what was right. He dialed the number, his fingers shaking. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Nathaniel. Came the voice on the other end, familiar, but cold. What's going on? Nathaniel let out a breath, his voice steady. It's time to end this. The next few moments were a blur. Phone calls made, files delivered, faces replaced by blank stares. The truth had to be heard, no matter the personal cost. Nathaniel wasn't going to let this story die. When the dust settled and the trial was over, the entire town of Blue Ridge was forced to face the reality of the corruption that had taken hold of their police department. The officers who had been involved were arrested. Some, like Officer Nathaniel, were heralded as heroes for their role in exposing the truth. But for Emma, the journey didn't end with the trial. With the loss of her mother weighing on her, the girl who had once been a scared, broken child was now a survivor. She was free to live a life Alicia had fought for her to have, a life where she could be safe from the shadows that had once haunted her. And Nathaniel? He stood outside the courtroom, watching Emma as she took one last look at the past. It was a quiet moment, a moment where redemption wasn't just for Emma, but for the entire town. The truth had set them free.